So I've been thinking, this channel needs a logo. So I went and got me one. And here it is, the new logo. Well, it's not a new one, I've had it for a while, but this is the channel's logo. Right, now we've got it in the shed, we can actually start working on it. What's the first job? The suspension. You may be asking yourself, does it run? Yes, I have ticked that box. There's probably some footage, either at the start or later on, of this thing actually running. Now, once we've slammed it, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have a look at this squeak that seems to be generated from the shifter. Now, why is that shifter squeaking? If it's a factory manual. Well, it's not a factory manual. This was a CVT from the beginning of its poor old little life, and now it's a manual. Now, you can say, well, wouldn't just the regular automatic, or the regular manual shifter transfer over to the automatic? Well, if we'd used the regular one, yeah, but the regular one wasn't used. Actual transmission and clutch and, of course, everything else has been pulled straight from an EK1. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, everything in these cars are cable, and most of everything in the EK1s are, of course, rod and digital. Now, what do you mean? Well, in a logo, you have shifter cables, and you have a speedo cable, and you have a cable clutch. In an EK1, you have a hydraulic clutch, and shifting rods, and an electronic speedo. And of course, that shoots up a few problems, because you can't use the automatic or the speedo cable, you can't use the shifting cables, and you can't use a cable clutch. You of course have to use hydraulics, electronics, and rods. So that's how our squeakings come about, because of course everything, well, the shifting rods are rubbing. Is this noise on the bottom of the car? So we need to do some clearancing under there. But as I said, first we're going to take care of the suspension. So keep watching. So now the shock's out, we can see the difference. So here's our EK1 spring on our logo strut. As you can see, the top's different, and of course the bottom is longer. Now you could say, why can't you just swap the bottom of the strut here with the bottom of the EK1 strut, since you know these shocks are probably in better nick? Well, I highly doubt it, but the problem is the size of what's in there. Now, not the cobwebs, the actual, okay, you can't see it, but of course the size of this bit here. Of course the thread is bigger on here than it is here, so that won't work. Now, what are we going to do to, of course, remedy the situation? Now, I can't cut shocks up and weld them back together, because that always ends badly. So instead of doing that, instead of shortening this end, which would be handy, we're going to shorten this. Now, why are we going to shorten this over, say, cutting one of the original springs, putting the original spring back in, and Bob's your auntie? Well, of course, I've already shortened all the original springs, and they didn't go as short as I'd like, while staying captive. And the reason why I want to use an EK1 spring is because it's actually about, once it's all the tension is being released, it's usually about this tool. And I'm not even joking, they're about there. So we can take a few off and still be able to make it captive. Hence, EK1 spring onto GA3 strut. So let's get on with that. So, now I've got it compressed, we can now take this off, slide into Black & Decker Special, and move on. For those of you who don't know what a Black & Decker Special is, well, let's just say Black & Decker, pretty common tool brand, make a certain tool that helps with the shortening, well, the making of shortened springs. So, I've picked me up a set of them, and we're going to chuck them in. Pretty much, that's all we're doing to lower the front of the car. Back of the car is a bit easier. We don't have to have these, and we don't have a whole strut, because of course it's a solid axle in the rear, and it just has a spring perch. You jack it up high enough, and hit it with a hammer hard enough, it'll fall out. So, of course, you can see we have the front end of the car back together, and you might be saying, is that much, not that much of a difference there, mate? And I'll be going, well, you're right. But one thing with suspension is, you got to let it sit, you got to let it settle. So, I'm going to crack on with doing the other side, and then, of course, come back in the next couple of days once it's settled, and have a look. This is my new helper today. This is the dog that knows everything. She's going to help us fix this car. Righto. So, you may be looking at this shock going, well, the strut going, why haven't you done that yet? Well, bit of a change of plans. Now, you might be saying, well, you're changing plans pretty quickly. Well, for you guys, it looks like it's been not too long, but for me, it's actually been a couple days fighting this beauty in here. Now, so what's the problem? This will not come off. Tried all sorts of penetrating fluids, even fire, and of course, just straight old brute force, and it still doesn't want to move. Now, you really kind of can't see, or maybe you can see it, that washer is not supposed to be split like that. I don't know if you can, no, you can't really see it. So what that's preventing is everything from moving. What it's done is pretty much locked the nut to the shaft, and nothing wants to move. So what are you going to do about that? Well, the only way I can see to get around this is by, of course, taking a grinder or a sawzall or something and cutting through here. Now, that would be all good if I had shot a new shock to replace this one, which I don't. So, what we're going to do is make a hybrid of the top hats. Now, what do you mean? Well, we're going to take an EK1 shock, and of course, take an EK1 shock and put it in a GA3, you need to change the top hats. So, we're going to take this top hat, and we're going to remove the center of it. So we're going to maybe press this bushing out. I mean, it's pretty hard and old and crusty, but I reckon we could probably get away with reusing it. And take the center section, or even more than just the center section, maybe just clear these studs out, and graft it into the top of the GA3 strut. And why would we do all that? Well, of course, to put a EK1 shock on. Now, what's the advantage of doing that? Well, it means we can take full advantage of the EK1 aftermarket. Now, of course, I'm going to have to find all the bits that were on it, because I got pretty excited, took all the butts off, and pretty much lost them all. So, we're going to have to find them, but that's pretty easy. I have a fair idea of where they're at. Anyway, moving on from that, of course, I said modify the top hats to fit an EK1 shock, and of course the advantage of using an EK1 shock means I can go buy, say, an adjustable shock, or maybe even a coilover or something, and of course aftermarket springs that fit that. Other advantages, more low. So this is just a quick comparison on, I guess you'd say, the pieces in between the EK1 and the GA3. Now you can see there's a lot of pieces, that's actually two there, there's a lot of pieces that go into one strut. So, with the GA3, the big bulky pieces you first see are of course the actual part that bolts to the strut. There's the top of the strut, and that slides over that, and then that's connected to the actual top hat via this big bushing, which of course is put there to dampen vibrations and make sure the shock can still turn when the car's turning. And of course, underneath all of that, you've got this big plate here, which then this bushing sits in between that plate and the actual spring holder. Now, all of this is good. It reduces vibrations and it makes the car nicer for Granny to drive around in. But it's extremely expensive and extremely overcomplicated for my tastes. So we're going to push all of those aside and we're going to replace them, of course, with one bushing, a rubber spring pad, and a top hat. So, of course, this, and this do all the same job as all of that. So, how are we going to make this fit that? Well, we're going to take this, and we're going to pop out these studs. Then we're going to weld the studs to the bottom of this. Now, you could say, well, you're going to have a bit of a hard time because you're probably going to have overlapping stud holes or whatever. Well, I've figured it out on how I'm actually going to do it. And all that's going to involve is a bit of welding, a bit of cutting, and a bit of welding. And we should be able to center the top of this into the center of this. Of course, a few measurements. And weld it all together. Righto. Now we've got the studs pushed out. We can clean this off and weld it to the GA3 top hat. Now, you may be asking, you may be thinking, isn't welding this together a sort of a bad thing? Well, as you can probably tell, this is welded together, so boo-hoo. Righto guys, now we've got this weld together, we can cut these tacks off here, these side tacks off, and test it in the car. But once we've done that, we'll try and recenter it a bit better. So of course, cut all the tacks off again and do it again. And after that, we might as well make a jig. Now, why would we make a jig? Well, it's so this can be replicated exactly the same. Now, I could leave it like this, and I don't know what it's going to do, but I don't think it will be as good as if it was center. Now, what do you mean? Well, it'll probably throw it on a funny angle or whatnot, so we might as well recenter it. But as I said, with the jig, we're just going to grab a tube that fits in here, and then grab a tube that either mounts to this outer lip here, or at the actual inner diameter of the top hat here. Now, of course, that'll either have to bolt to the plate, or the top of it will have to bolt to that tube that's going in there. Now, I know that seems a bit complicated, but it's not really. It's just a couple of pieces of tube, maybe a bolt and some welding, and I'll be able to slap another one together real quick, because all I'll really have to do is grind the EK top hat clean, grind the 45s into it for the studs, and then grind these sides here flat so they can be welded together. Now, the next part we will be looking at after that is this gap here that I can just fit the tip of my finger in. So how are you going to deal with that? Well, we might as well use something like this, a piece of steel. Now, it's going to have to sit on an angle or be curved around. So that's the next thing I've got to figure out, as of course we are also competing with a bush. Of course, that's not how it sits, but we've got to compete with this as well. So if we make that weld too thick or too fat or whatever, this won't fit anymore, and we'll have to go back to the drawing board. So we might as well work this all out while it's on the bench and get on with it. Guys, now we've got the top hat pretty much welded on, we might as well have a look at the bottom of the shock. Now, there are a few differences in, of course, the bottom as well. Now, one of them being is that there's no way where to mount the brake line. That's got a bit of stretch on it. It's no good. They have to get some new ones. But the real big issue is this gap. Now, this shock is sitting all the way down on top of the CV, so it can't sit there. So we're going to have to make a sleeve. Now, you might be saying, well, that's a bit dangerous. Well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. What do you mean? Well, I'm not going to just, of course, make a sleeve, chuck it in, and let it sit. Because if it's not tightened correctly or secured correctly, of course, the shock and the hub can move independently, and we don't want that. We want them to all move as one. So we're going to make a sleeve and probably weld it to the bottom perch here, like we are doing with the top. So with that, that means we can also add a mount for this bracket here to screw to, so we can make that all work as it was. Now, I may have said this before. Why am I, you may be asking, and I probably said this before, why am I going through all this effort to fit EK1 shocks to this car when it has okayish shocks from the factory? Well, those shocks are about twice the price of a regular EK shock. So there's one reason. And there is no real aftermarket for these cars this side of the world. Now, what do you mean? Well, over here we have multiple manufacturers that will make a custom shock, so adjustability and all of that, and of course lowering springs. Now, no one makes lowering springs, as I said, this side of the world for these cars. So my idea was, of course, to take an EK1 spring, invert it, and shorten it, and it didn't really turn out so well. So I reckon if we use the shorter EK1 shock, that should give us the results we're looking for. But also, as I was saying about the aftermarket thing, it gives me way more options on springs and shocks rather than just, deal with what you've got sort of thing. So next thing we'll be looking at is the speed sensor. Now, I'm going to have to take the whole hub apart, so take it off the car and all of that to actually get back into there. Now, it was all set up in there except for the actual sensor itself. Now, I'm hoping that it hasn't been grinding up against the back of the studs and caused an absolute mess. And of course, after we've sorted that out, we might as well have a look at this tie rod end, because that's shagged, and these brakes. Now, as you can see, they haven't been used in a while, but pretty sure I showed you on the other side that this surface here was completely rusted, and on this one, it's not. To me, that means we have some brake issues. Now, what do you mean brake issues? Well, it seems like this one may be dragging, as this car's only moved under human power rather than its own power in the last little while. And if this surface is clean, that one's rusty, it really doesn't make sense. So we're going to have a look. I'm going to have a look at maybe putting bigger brakes on it. Now, where would you get bigger brakes for this thing? Well, Civic. That's where I'd get them. Now, I'm not too sure how these ones are actually put on. I'm pretty sure it's just regular caliper and wheel nuts hold disc on. And if that's the case, we can probably find a EG or EK or whatever disc that they are of course bigger because they're heavier cars, and we might as well match the caliper. And if we can make those fit, we might as well have a look at, of course, even bigger aftermarket discs and bigger front calipers. And if we're going to go that far, we might as well have a look at the back brakes, which of course are drums, and we might as well swap them out for discs. And those parts may have to come from, say, a Integra or a EK9, I think they are. Just the later EKs that eventually came with rear discs. Now, why would I go through all this if it's not like you've bumped up the performance or anything? Well, that is coming, and at the end of the video, I'm going to maybe go over the plans. Well, I will go over the plans for what's happening in the performance department. But first, we've got to sort the suspension out and sort a few other things out before we can go any further. Right, guys, it's the end of the video, and you might be saying, well, you didn't actually finish this. Well, of course, nothing ever gets finished around here, don't you know? But this will, of course, actually be finished when you next see it. Anyway, this is the end of the video. Like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. But I've actually gone and got myself a Facebook. So look up, of course, this channel name, or I'll just chuck a link in the description. Might be easier. And keep your eyes peeled on that, as there's going to be more regular updates on that than there is, of course, on YouTube, because it takes hours, days, in this case, to film some of this stuff. And, I can take a picture or take a short video, and I can slap it on Facebook, and you guys can keep updated on what's happening.